Gas prices in California back up over $5 a gallon. How much are they where you are? Well, let's talk about it. Bang!
There it is. You know, guys, he's on a boat again. For crying out loud. Ah, there's the damn view.
Just for those that doubt it, Pete.
Not too bad. Not too bad.
It's okay. You know, it's a rough life, but somebody's got to do it. I think Jimmy Buffett might have said that. But welcome back to the Rebel's Edge. We're going to cover a minute. We're going to cover fantastic futures, and then we're going to get into the stocks and then a little sports, because that's what we do. And we welcome you back and remind you that not only is the Rebel Edge on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but today we're on all week because we don't trade on Friday. Just reminding them, Pete, because some of them might not remember that Friday into Easter, also known as Good Friday, we don't trade. It's closed.
That's true. It's true. I'll tell you what, if anybody's ever questioning what the microphone situation is over there, I can just say it's like the hunt of Red October right now. John's over there and is getting a little bit of wind blowing and everything. God, you can tell I'm a little jealous, huh?
It's going to get scary, and it's going to get – and we'll be damn lucky to survive it. All right, let's dive right in, Pete, to the macro minute. Macro is really just dependent on, gosh, a lot of the tech that was just zooming, Pete, now they're taking them apart bit by bit. I mean, you've got Apple, which we'll cover. We've got AMD and Intel, which we'll cover. There's a lot going on in tech, and not very much of it's good anymore.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, John. On the other side of it, just going back to last week for a second, we talked about the Fed. Obviously, that was going to be the big keynote gig that everybody was waiting for, and it crescendoed up, and the markets ripped to the upside until they didn't on Friday, where we had a little bit of a meltdown specifically on the Dow. But I think that you listen to some of the former Fed chairs, John, a lot of them are like just like you and I right now. They're kind of questioning, well, why do they keep talking about cuts? What we see is inflation that is sticky. And I know you're going to hit this in the next one, Fantastic Futures. So it's interesting to me because we keep saying it, but we've been saying it. We keep saying, how can they possibly forecast the whole year that they're going to do 6, cuts? Is that real? Yeah. How do you do that? Anyway, I appreciate that some of the former Feds guys are coming out and saying, what are they talking about? It's too sticky and they can't do it.
Yep. Well, let's kick it off with Fantastic Futures then, Pete.
Fantastic Futures!
There you go.
Fantastic Futures, man, flying across the screen. And you know what else is flying? Money out of your wallet. Because California is up over $5 a gallon. And nationally, we've gone up from $2.90 a month ago, Pete. A month ago, we've gone up over $3.55 now. And we're not even feeling the full effects of being over $81 for like 3 or 4 trading days, but we are over $81 per barrel for U.S. West Texas Intermediate. Obviously, overseas, it's up more. I'm thinking, Pete, that's going to start impacting FedEx, UPS, the airlines, any of the truckers, as well as discretionary spending from Joe's and Jane's. What do you think?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's a great example of what we hit when we were talking about the macro picture, which is, hey, look, there's a stickiness here. There still is inflation. Let's not turn our heads and say, you know what? No, it's not really there. It is. I'm just going to hit real quick that we've talked about this time and time again. The cocoa prices, John, it's only up 240%. Year to date, it's up 120%. And they continue to rocket to the upside and set brand new records. You've got weather, you got medical use, you've got a demand, and now you're over 9,200 per metric ton, up 3% today. I would say cocoa's on a pretty good run right now.
Well, it's good if you're somebody who raises cocoa. It isn't good for most of the rest of us.
Not good
from
for Hershey.
Yeah. Well, Hershey, the medical applications that Pete has mentioned time and time again. And there's just a lot of things that are dependent on this that, they're not cheering it. But if you're long cocoa or if you're somebody who grows it, you're a happy camper.
Happy.
All right, Pete, let's dive into Boeing because, man, they are just having problems with Boeing 737s, and United is not doing a great job with what they're doing either, because a lot of these planes, in fact, everything but Alaska, Pete, that's had a problem lately has been United, sadly to say, because I fly them a lot. So Boeing shares are up today. How come? Dave Calhoun, the CEO, says, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm out of here. Not immediately, but year end, this guy is out of there. That's why the market's up, Pete.
Yeah. Well, the wicked witch is dead, so to speak. I mean, they're going to get him out. When you're sitting over this and you are responsible for the company, that is one of the big responsibilities, of course, of the CEO. Now, he's not down there, screwing around with anything, but he's got to have the right people taking care of things. And unfortunately for Boeing, it just hasn't really been there. And the safety measures and everything else has been a concern. And we're talking about a major U.S. company that's in part of a duopoly, and they are stumbling. And all you got to do, John, this stock hasn't done anything from the last, it's done a lot, but it's in the same spot that it was at the end of October is where it is now. Meanwhile, the rest of the market has been rocketing to the upside, and we're setting record numbers, whether it's the S&P, the Dow, NASDAQ, you name it, ripping to the upside. So it makes some sense to me. I'll tell you, I think with 140,000 employees, this is a major contributor, obviously, to the economy and everything that they produce and everything else. But there needed to be a change. And I'm actually just surprised that it's taken this long because, quite frankly, this has been in the news. It's been in front of us. It's been going on for a long time. And it's just finally getting to the point where, all right, Calhoun's stepping off. Somebody else is going to step in. And hopefully it's a lot safer.
Yeah, and Pete, by the way, it's not just Boeing, it's the chairman of the board is also stepping down. Yeah. So that shows you maybe that they had an issue with oversight as well. Mm-hmm. All right, let's get to one of the big business stories of the day, Intel and AMD. Now, the major indexes took a hit because China's going to be blocking the use of chips from advanced micro devices and from Intel, Pete. So that's the Financial Times that reported that. And wow, both those stocks were down 5% in a heartbeat.
They were, although AMD bounced back almost immediately, John. And I'm not sure if people just kind of stepped back and said, this is a solid company. They've got a lot of other areas in the world in which they can contribute to. And then you look over at Intel. Intel's been ripping. I mean, Intel, for the people who haven't been following it, all you're looking at is NVIDIA and AMD and some of the other names, semiconductors that have had such great performance. Take a look at the recent performance out of Intel. And so you can understand why that one kind of getting beat up a little bit more to some degree. But it's interesting, John. And once again, it's one of these things where the Chinese are they're stirring things up. And I think that's the big broad view from my perspective is China is pretty ticked off at the U.S. and they're doing whatever they can, whenever they can. And as a matter of fact, who's replacing basically AMD and Intel? It's none of the names in the U.S. They're all Chinese names have filled in the last couple of pieces that they need. So it's interesting, and it's showing us right now that there is a huge divide. And right now we're having a major issue with the Chinese in a lot of different ways. And this is something that's getting a little bit uglier. I know nobody's talking about it in an ugly way. I'm going to say it. It's getting kind of ugly, John.
It is. And, I don't disagree with the president, Pete, actually saying, you know what, NVIDIA, we're not going to let you sell your chips over there anymore. Kind of agree with that if this chip is as, be all end all as they say it is. But it's a matter of time before the Chinese, of course, have to say, you know what, we're going to push back as well. So not surprised at all, Pete. Yeah. All right, Apple. Apple has been going down, down, down. It's my biggest holding, and I'm not happy about that. They face a litany of challenges, Pete. The latest one being the Justice Department last Thursday sued Apple, saying basically the company's violating antitrust laws with their restrictive iPhone and App Store policies. Okay, Europe's gone after them for that too. But that's not the only thing hurting Apple here. They were late to the party with AI, and we've talked about that, Pete and I have, because they focused on a car of all things, an EV, rather than making their phones better and helping people be more productive with a phone that has AI embedded in it. Now they're going to have to rely on Google for that, Pete. So there's a lot of reasons that Apple's kind of going to the downside, but this is not a good backdrop for Apple right now.
It's not, and I put the blame on the guy at the top. We do it with Boeing. Why can't we do it with Apple? Everybody loves Tim Cook, but I'm going to point the finger at him right now, John. They've got the antitrust issues that they're facing right now. That's a big deal. They put a lot of money and a lot of time, a lot of effort. They stole a lot of people away from Tesla to try to get into the EV market, probably with an app with Apple, and that just got flushed. And they basically have very minimal exposure right now to AI. Obviously, they can ramp it up, and they're going to get into that probably in a very fast way. But nonetheless, they're late to the game, right? I mean, to some degree, you'd have to point the finger at the man up top. Even the phone, as good as the phone is, as much as we talk about the phone, and actually in the Q1 report, they had some decent numbers, but the decent numbers weren't over in China where they were hoping to get the bigger and badder numbers. And they have slipped to number 4 with the phone, John, in China. So there's a lot of reasons right now where you got to look at Apple and say, and I'm right there with you. It's my biggest holding. I've had it since 1993. It's just been one of those names that's been great, but the leadership, I'm just starting to have to question it to some degree and see, why are they behind? Why is the company that's always been in front of everybody else suddenly the company that seems to be reacting to others before they actually make some moves? That, I think, is a problem. No one else is going to talk about it. They love Tim Cook. They don't want to throw any rocks at him. But I'm going to tell you, it's worth throwing some rocks right now.
Yeah, I have to agree. I have rolled my calls that I sell against my stock because we like to refer to that focus as collecting rent against an apartment that you own, because 1,000 shares of Apple, it's $169,000. Anybody want to leave their $169,000 condo that they're not sleeping in, that they're not using regularly? You just want to let it sit there? No, you want to collect rent. But Pete, this is the bullish side. You and I have just talked about the bearish cases. Here's the bullish side. For the first time in 4 quarters, they actually had sales growth. And it came from the iPhone 15, which everybody said, oh, they're not going to sell as many of that. Yes, they did, the titanium phone. And it also came from services, something Pete has pounded the table on over and over and over again. And services are now, I think, up over 23%, Pete. Might be more than that, but that's huge. And that's where the sales growth is coming from. It came from those 2 factors. So I'm not dumping my Apple stock, but I just wanted to let you guys know, with all the negatives, there's a little positive, because for 4 straight quarters, they had not reported sales growth at all. It was flat. Now they've finally done it. All right, let's talk about Masimo, Pete. That's MASI. Medical technology company, up pretty big today because they're going to separate into a consumer business and the consumer audio and healthcare products, separating those two. Seems to be that Wall Street likes this, Pete, and that's why we're seeing them buy up the shares.
I think you're right, John. And I think this is an incredible company that most people probably don't have any familiarity with. And it's really interesting what they do. I think the separation makes some sense. The different focuses, they want more profitability out of the healthcare. They think they can do it by isolating it out. I think it makes a lot of sense. By the way, I always bring this up when we see a stock like this that makes a nice little pop to the upside. They did have a fairly large short interest on this one, John. The PE is very high as well. That's something I think needs to be worked on to some degree. Obviously, they've just got to figure out a way to make those earnings bigger, and I'm sure that they will. But those high shorts definitely got the guys who are short, they're getting squeezed a little bit today because that had a pretty nice pop. It's pulled back some from the high, but nonetheless, it's a really nice pop on the news that they're putting out there today.
News for Masimo and their shareholders, and it might be 2 interesting companies instead of 1.
Yeah.
Often they do that to try to unlock value, as you guys hear us talk about all the time. All right, Pete, let's watch one of our favorite broadcasters, Stephen A. Smith. And not surprisingly, he gets a lot of text messages, Pete. And I think his text messages are different from what a lot of us get. So let's take a listen to what Stephen A. Smith had to say here.
I have to read you a text that I received this morning. Good morning, sir. Although greatest of anything is always a debate, I beg to differ on greatest point guard of all time with what you said. Magic Johnson is easily the best point guard of all time. Steph Curry is very close, but not in front of Magic. You must define point guard to really have a serious debate. Steph Curry is by far the best shooter of all time. Yes, his movement has created many shots for his teammates. He's a career 43% three-point shooter. But Magic Johnson invented the triple-double. Not true invented, but makes it more noticeable in terms of the impact on the game. It's a point guard stat, to be honest. Magic was the best. By the way, Magic has 5 NBA championships.
Wow.
That quote this morning at 5:45 is from Mr. Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
His pace and how he reads it and how he goes through it, John. I mean, Stephen A. is the best. And I love the fact that he's kind of opened up and he's not just a sports guy anymore. He's a guy who does even a little bit more. Whether you agree with him or not agree with him, he has very intelligent thoughts about politics. He's got a lot of great thoughts about things outside of sports. But his sports coverage, there's nobody like him. I don't know what they pay him, but whatever they pay him, I'm sure he's well worth that pay for sure.
I think he and Pat McAfee, Pete, are two of the best in terms of what they don't just talk about what everybody else is talking about. Like right now today, who's talking about Steph Curry and Magic Johnson? Stephen A. You know, everybody else like us is talking about March Madness, is talking about, you know, the Anthony Edwards up in Minnesota, you know, and the phenomenal year he's having. Stephen A. gets to share, you know what? Michael pinged me 5:45 in the morning to tell me this is the guy. This is the guy. And by the way, Snoop Dogg is the guy that tweeted that, folks, and posted it up on his Instagram. And for those of you who don't know, Snoop follows Pete and I both. And he's the guy that said, you know what? Pete and John should be the guys that take over Twitter. When he said, when Elon Musk is looking for a guy to run Twitter, get those ponytail dudes up there. That's what Snoop Dogg said. You can go back and look at it on Twitter, folks.
Oh, you gotta love him. You gotta love him.
Hats off to you, buddy. You're the best.
He is the best. I'll tell you, those guys were so great. And I love that whole thing recently, John, talking about how good of a rapper, how he's the best ever, is Eminem. I mean, that was pretty cool coming from the guys who basically created rap and stuff. I thought that was pretty killer. All right, John, we are going to hit a little NCAA, and the March Madness is going on. And here's what I wanted to just kind of focus on a little bit. So you and I last week, we were talking about this. We talked about the versatility and the depth of a team like UConn that has been number one or at least in the top 3 for the entire year, and for all the right reasons. And all they do is absolutely scrub the teams that come in front of them. And so far in the tournament, it hasn't been much of an argument on how good they really are. So they've got 5 starters. All of them can shoot. All of them can rebound. All of them will stand in front of somebody, take a foul. They just do it all. And it's impressive. You got to give it credit to the players, the coach, and everything else. There's a team that's up there that's in their region, they're number 1, and that's Purdue. I would say almost the exact opposite for Purdue, John. I like them. Obviously, they've got that big, giant guy in Eddie who is unbelievable, but they just don't quite have it. So I'm going to throw out the prediction right now that Gonzaga takes them down. Now, Gonzaga is a reasonably high seed, but not, they're not number 1. And they just seem to always come when it's March and it's madness. Gonzaga's involved, and Gonzaga always seems to be in the Sweet 16 or even higher than that. So I'm going to call that one out as probably what I think will be the big upset. I think they take down Purdue. Now, Purdue looked pretty damn good the other day, but UConn is going to win this whole thing. It's just a matter of getting through it and getting to the team that they're going to play. But I think that Gonzaga is pretty fun. And what some of these teams have done to some of the other teams so far in the tournament. Is there any game that you had a chance to check out that you said, you know what, that was one hell of a game?
Yep. Pete, it was the North Carolina Tar Heels.
Yep.
They were trailing Michigan State, and Michigan State's a 9 seed. So this is like, oh, we're going to knock off a big one, sort of like you said about Purdue a year ago, Pete.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue got knocked off. First time ever, a number 1 was knocked off by a 16. That was Purdue last year. But North Carolina was down 12. And 10 minutes into their round, in that 32-team round that was, of course, before we get to the 16, which is what we're at now, they threw a switch, Pete, and a whole different team showed up from that moment on, and they put the hurting on Michigan State. So that's a team that I would say, man, adversity, if you can come back from adversity like that, I like you. I like the Tennessee Vols. Marquette's interesting, Pete, but I like Creighton more than Marquette here. I don't know if you agree, but those are two of the teams, the Blue Jays and the Tar Heels, that I like a lot of the remaining 16.
I agree with you, but you do have a little bias with Creighton. John's wife went to school there. But you know what? You're right. And they can ball. And I actually picked them, John, as one of those teams that actually could get pretty daggone deep into this tournament because they just have all the fundamental side of it, and they've got some great shooting, and they put up some points. So that's the kind of team that actually can get pretty far within the tournament, and I think that's a possibility. All right, next we're going to go to NCAA football. Here's what I wanted to bring up to you, John, because you and I both played college football. That's why we do the sports segment. Played college football, played pro football. We've been around the block once or twice. I had a great time this weekend when I was at the University of Minnesota campus, and I was asking the head coach, I go, why is it that this year you're not going to have a spring game? Because most teams, well, almost all teams have a spring game, and a lot of them get televised, and that's all around the country, which is probably a pretty good recruiting tool to some degree. Anyway, they're not going to do a spring game. They'd rather not. He gave me the reasons why. And then he and I started talking, and I said, I've heard talk of this. Have you ever considered this? The NCAA, now that it's they would have to go through a process to get this done, John, but how about a spring game, an actual game? And what I mean by that is, how about this? Alabama plays Troy. Auburn plays University of Alabama, Birmingham. They're all right next to it. Minnesota could play Minnesota State, which is the former one from down in there. They're down by Gustavus, John. They're a big university, great hockey school, really good football school as well. So that's another one. Maybe Northern Iowa goes to Iowa. However you want to do it, but you get some small, you get the David and Goliath thing going on. You put them in the stadium. You pay them some money. You charge for tickets. Maybe you pay them $500,000 or $1 million, whatever it ends up being, whatever you bring in. Maybe that whole thing goes to the team, and you play an actual game. And this is not just a crazy idea. This is an idea that's been kicked around a little bit here and there over the last few years. Kind of makes sense because it makes the spring game that much more interesting, right? And it takes away what once was, as you and I both know, first 3 games of the year, oftentimes, those are the teams that you might play, right? You might play. There's somebody a little bit lower. It's almost like preseason. Take that away because these conferences are too big. You've got to play as many of the teams in your conference as you can. So this kind of gives you the ability to still give those guys their day in the sun, and yet now you can still have most of the teams that you are scheduled to play from your conference. You can load it all up and you're ready to go. What do you think about an idea? Is that crazy? Are you worried about injury, or what do you think?
Everybody's worried about injury. Yeah. So for that reason, I'll take your idea, which is better than mine. But my idea, Pete, might be you do a scrimmage. And a scrimmage is not the same as a game. We all know that. So, for instance, when Pete was with Tampa, they would go up to Atlanta, not to the city of Atlanta, but they'd go up to scrimmage against the Atlanta Falcons at some small college and so forth. So instead, Pete, and obviously Kansas City does the same thing. They did it at River Falls, Wisconsin, and the Vikings would go over there and scrimmage with them, or whoever. It's like the Grapefruit League, if you will, when baseball does that, except they play full games like Pete's saying. So, what Pete has just said is different than what I'm saying. But I think you might get a buy-in from coaches that do worry about injury with a scrimmage, because you basically say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 10 plays on offense, and then you guys get it. Then we do 10 plays again, and then you guys go 10 plays against our defense, and so forth and so on. Get them like 50, 60 reps. In other words, 5 times turn on that thing. That's enough. And you would sell it out because, again, everybody would like to see that. But I think you could keep it a little not as vicious as it might be otherwise, because those, especially those smaller schools that have a chip on their shoulder about not getting the full ride to Minnesota when they're down at Minnesota State, you know, that'd be they'd still love to show them up, but now you'd have, you know, that safeties out there against some D-back, like you say, some 6'3", 210-pound D-back, and some wide out is going to try to burn that guy on a scrimmage and so forth. Granted, they try to beat him in the game too, but there's more hitting than there is with the scrimmage, in my opinion. But yeah, I like your idea, and I think it would work.
I like the idea that it could be a scrimmage. It's scripted. You're doing all the things that you want to do to kind of mimic a game as close as you can. But nonetheless, I like it either way. And I think you could sell some tickets to something like that. I think people would want to come from both schools. I think you'd have alumni supporting and all the rest of it. And I think it'd be a great opportunity for people. And it's just another way to raise a little bit of money as well for some of the schools. So I think it could be something very valuable for everybody. But you know, these spring games, they get a little ridiculous, right? So this at least kind of breaks it up a little bit, makes it a little bit more fun, and gives people an opportunity to show what they can do. And maybe by doing that, some of these guys can get highlighted a little bit that are somewhere else that get the opportunity to do something like this. I think it would be a lot more interesting than the present spring games that they've got.
Gotcha. Well, folks, we appreciate all of you joining us. I am, as I say, going to be heading back out.
Lives a rough life.
It's rough. That's what my dog says all the time, Pete. Rough. But we will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time with the Rebels Edge. Make sure you tune in for that. Check out marketrebellion.com/get started. You can get education as well as subscriptions there. marketrebellion.com/get started. A week from tomorrow, Pete and I will be on stage with Grant Cardone at the 10X GrowthCon in Miami. So we're really looking forward to that. 34,000 people have already signed up. It's going to be a heck of a deal, folks. Hear more about it tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow at 1.